Welcome, everyone. So we see people coming in. We'll start in just about 30 seconds or so to let people just get into the meeting, okay? But thank you so much for joining us. If you're just joining us, welcome. We'll start in just about 20 or so seconds. Give people a chance to enter in the Zoom. All right. Thank you so much for all those who've joined us right at the top of the webinar today. We're delighted to have you. You are joining TNTP's webinar Beyond the Paycheck, and we're excited to delve into this conversation over the next hour, where we will engage in a discussion focused on the challenges, but more importantly, the solutions that K-12 system leaders and thinkers are considering as they work to recruit and retain a strong educator workforce. All in an effort for the ultimate goal of supporting student outcomes in the face of, quite frankly, tightening K-12 budgets and challenging budget times. So we are excited to delve into this conversation today and very grateful that you all could join us. Before we dig into our discussion, here's a quick look at our agenda for our time together over the next hour. The majority of our webinar will be focused on hearing directly from the folks closest to the work, K-12 state and district leaders, along with field leaders who are thinking about this question and thinking about the educator workforce in a time of tough budget challenges. But before that, I'll take a quick moment to set some context for our discussion today. So you'll be hearing from my colleague, Dr. Stephanie Bretnan, and myself, Matthew Joseph, as we facilitate today's conversation. We both serve on TNTP's policy and advocacy team, where we are proud to contribute to TNTP's unique lens of practice, policy, and research. This allows TNTP to bring coherence to the work that we do with our partners across the country. And that means specifically 4,000 districts and in 33,000 schools across 32 states. As I mentioned at the top, the bulk of our time today will be hearing from a panel of experts. And so while I'll do some quick context framing of our discussion, we really want to get to that part of the conversation. But just briefly about each of our panelists, we're so excited to have their expertise and the gift of their time today. Romanier Johnson is a nationally recognized education finance leader, currently serving as the Chief Financial Officer for Broward County Public Schools in Florida, which is the 6th largest school district in the United States. I'm already seeing some love for Ro on the chat, which I love. With over 2 decades of experience spanning K-12, higher education, and financial consulting, Romanier brings deep expertise in strategic fiscal management, budget reform, and organizational leadership. We also are joined by Quabila Huddleston, who serves on the Education Trust's P-12 policy team, where she is a leader on equitable funding, on equitable school funding. Quabila is responsible for analyzing state and federal policy proposals and supporting state partners and advocates in achieving more equitable state funding formulas for students of color and students from low-income backgrounds. We also will hear from Kelvy Oser, who serves as the Deputy Commissioner of Educator and System Support at the Texas Education Agency. In her role, Kelvy is leading innovative work, innovative policy solutions, where she works to enhance the performance of school systems across the state of Texas and plays a crucial role in ensuring the state effectively recruits, supports, and retains talented teachers and principals to serve all of Texas's public school students. And we'll also hear from Lynn Johnson, who is TNTP's Chief Strategy, Growth, and Finance Officer. In this role, Lynn leads organizational and growth strategies, business operations, development and fundraising, finance, and technology to develop TNTP's reach and deepen our direct impact, growth, and health as we work to serve those thousands of districts across the country and millions of public school students. So we are joined by a really fantastic panel today and excited to hear more about them. But before we get into that, we you all joined for a reason. You're aware of the context, but we wanted to briefly set some of that context and set it for our conversation. So the budget challenges for school districts have been making news. I'm sure everyone joining today's webinar is no stranger to that. And that is for a multitude of reasons. State and local budgets are feeling constraints for their own reasons, but also federal grants have been halted and federally appropriated funds have been withheld. And then just as recently as last Friday have been reinstated. So school districts are facing some tough school choices. As any education leader knows, the largest investment in any K through 12 budget is its staffing. And in the face of tough budget challenges, some districts have started to make difficult decisions of staffing cuts. So when all the evidence is clear that the most important in-school factor on student achievement and outcomes are the educators leading our classrooms and our school buildings, it is absolutely critical that when it comes to tough cuts and tough decisions that may have to be made, they are being made in a way that keeps student outcomes central. And of course, that means in part doing everything one can to recruit and retain the most effective educators. We wanted to get a little bit into some data as to what could be causing some of the local and state financial constraints. So notably, when school funding is so closely tied to student enrollment as it is important to recognize that tough budget times right now that we're facing may unfortunately not be a temporary thing. Student enrollment has been on the decline. There are a number of reasons for this, including declining birth rates, trends that were exacerbated from the continued fallout of the pandemic, and more. This graph that you see here on this slide takes a look at this trend at a national level. Nationwide, the number of teachers in 2023 to 24 was 4% higher than it was in 2014 and 2015. And the number of students in 23-24 was 2% lower than it was in 14-15. This resulted in decreases to the student-teacher ratio during this same time span that you see here on the screen. And note the large decrease in students during COVID was almost 3%. These are troubling trends from a financial perspective. Fewer students means less funding, which is typically determined on a per student basis. Here's another look at some original data research that TNTP put together. So while the last slide looked at a nationwide trends, this slide looks at this trend by state, comparing average annual growth in student population over the last 10 years in relation to annual teacher growth. So states in this upper left-hand corner, if we could just click this slide one more time, are those facing difficult trends that could create budget difficulties. That includes because declining enrollment and increasing number of teachers will exacerbate that trend. 30 states are in this upper left-hand quadrant. 13 states, including DC, have had an increase in student enrollment, while 38 states have had a decrease in student enrollment. And just 2 states have seen an increase in student enrollment and a decrease in their teachers. That is Florida and Alaska. So while this is good from a financial perspective, it might create other concerns in terms of student-teacher ratio in these particular states. So we highlight this because it shows that addressing the impact on the trend of K through 12 budgets requires targeted, tailored solutions. We can talk about these trends at national and state levels, but of course, each district faces a set of concerns that impacts their communities in unique ways. The challenge of constrained K through 12 budget is not one that anyone welcomes. They're tough, but through innovative solutions and cross-sector partnerships, a district could be able to retain its most effective educators and thereby be able to keep their focus and their hard work on increasing student outcomes. This is exactly what our panelists will discuss, talking about the work in their contexts and solutions that they see. With that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Breton, who will get us started on our panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Nithya. I am excited to welcome our panelists today and have this very crucial and timely conversation. Just a quick note before we get started for our audience. As we engage in the discussion, I encourage you to drop any questions that come up for you in the chat because we will have a Q&A portion after the panel. And then also, if there's something that resonates with you or you're just like, yes, feel free to use those reaction buttons. I was very excited to see some hearts and some affirmations come through for our panelists at the beginning, at the introduction. So we would love to kind of keep that energy going as we have this conversation. And with that, I'm excited to kick off this conversation with a question for all of our panelists. Would love each of you to take, 1 or 2 minutes to, reflect on this. Today's headlines around K-12 funding are bleak, but in every challenge, there can be an opportunity. What would you say is one thing that's giving you hope or that you see as a potential opportunity for K-12 systems as states and districts are facing staffing challenges at a time of constrained budgets? And Lynn, would love for you to kick us off with this.
Love it. Thank you for that. Hello, everyone. Let me just start by saying that right now, I think we're in a very difficult time that is providing a level of uncertainty. So, I mean, one, I want to thank all the educators out there for just keeping focus on students, and I think that's something that keeps me having hope, is that we're focusing on what matters most, and that's learning for all of our kids as well. I think the second thing that's given me hope, and I hope we can elaborate on, is that we're just seeing the incredible work to really adjust to what I would call a new normal. I think this is really elevating our opportunity to reimagine education in some ways, and also doubling down on what works and keeping that front and center as well.
Thank you, Lynn. Wonderfully said. Kelvy, we'll go to you next.
Thank you. And also want to just thank y'all for hosting this opportunity to have this discussion, because I think it's such an important one for everyone joining us today. Just kind of scanning through the participant list and just really impressed by all of the incredible expertise of the folks here on this call and the interest in this topic. I agree with Lynn. I have a lot of hope in our situation right now. One of the things at the state level that is bringing me hope is really looking at some of the results from states like Louisiana and Mississippi, where we've seen that, these aren't the states that have the highest per pupil funding models, but are seeing really great results in reading in particular, but really accelerating learning. So, looking at these models and seeing that, there are ways to think about how do we target and invest the funding we have in the strategies that work, and really focusing on what we know works for outcomes for students. And that when we do that, it's not always about how much money we have, but how do we spend the money that we have. Also here in Texas, seeing that in our most recent legislative session, the legislature just invested $8.5 billion in increasing funding, really invested in direct compensation, supports, preparation for teachers. And I think that just shows the level of understanding and investment in both the targeted strategies that we see work, listening to the teacher voices that came out of our teacher vacancy task force and the recommendations from that task force to invest in the teachers of Texas. So I do think there's a willingness to invest the funds we have in teachers.
Thank you, Kelby. And I don't know if you saw all those affirmations coming through with some of the points you brought up. This is amazing. Quabila, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, just want to echo everyone else and thanking you all for facilitating this really important and timely discussion. We are certainly concerned, right, about what's happening in the K-12 space. So just thankful to be able to contribute our perspective, our organizational perspective. I really want to build on some of what Kelvy just shared. I think what gives me hope is knowing that state leaders in particular are really interested in how do we target additional resources to the students who are facing the steepest barriers to learning. We know that in the last 3 years and just in this year alone, we've seen some states pass student-centered funding formulas, which really are designed to target students that are either learning English, or students from low-income backgrounds, or students with disabilities, right? Like recognizing that those students need significantly more support in order to thrive in the classroom and beyond. I'll also say that with these formulas, it's not just about targeting those additional resources. It's also about recognizing the flexibility that district leaders need to innovate and, you know, come up with different staffing models and just providing different resources that they know their students need. And so that increase in flexibility for districts is really, really great. And then as Kelvy mentioned, you know, with the NAEP scores, there's all this talk about what's wrong in the K-12 system. But we know, right, from the data on how ESSER funds, how certain states invested their ESSER funds in certain districts, that there are strategies that work. And now is the time really for us to, you know, look at the data, double down, and just invest in what we know works for students. So that's what's giving me hope.
Thanks, Kapila. Ro, feel free to round us out.
Well, thanks for this opportunity. And I'm so glad we're having this webinar about our kids' future, because they are our future. And we need to be focusing on that, because education is the key to success for our country and for every individual. So this lack of funding is like an attack on education, but we have did a lot of things to really bounce back, and we see some positive things happening. It's the way we're restructuring ourselves and finding out ways to make sure the resources align with our student success. So what we have did, we focus on our foundation here at Broward. I'm going to talk about what we have started to implement here at Broward. Focus on our structure. Our key core is our kids at K-3. If you get the foundation right, we're making sure highly qualified teachers are in front of kids, so we can make sure that their foundation, the building block of their learning, is in place and their proficiency. So when they get up to, we are not chasing gains, because if you get proficiency, you automatically going to get the gains. So it's changing the way we are looking at instructing kids in the classroom. We're doing team teaching, where we partnership to use the strength of our teachers. And because the classroom is getting hot, you know, our population is growing some with kids, but we're losing kids. So we got to do the budget constraints, we got to do partnership teaching and build on those, leveraging our educators' strength in the classroom, because we want to make sure they have a solid foundation. And also, we know that K-3, you're learning to read. So our foundation, the principal, and then after the third grade, you're reading to learn. So make sure those highly qualified teachers and innovative things we're doing, we're building pipelines. So now we get the partnership with the community educators and higher level, making sure that we get those teachers in here and showing them what they can do for the future of our kids. So we're doing a lot of construction in AI. We're using the AI tool. Now it's becoming live. We're implementing that in the classroom so kids can have real world experience, not just beyond the classroom. So we're changing how we thinking about teaching. It's not the old way, the old 19th century, 20s. We're coming up. We're changing and innovating, because we know the kids are more technology sound than we are, so we got to get up to date. So those are some of the things we're doing here at Broward.
Thank you so much, Ro. And I'm going to keep with this same focus on the state and district level and sort of the on the ground expertise that you and Kelvy offer. So this next question is directed for Kelvy and Ro. Given today's fiscal and political environment, what guiding principles are helping you make tough decisions around school funding and staffing, which I think will be building on some of the great things you both shared around your hope. And Kelvy, will start with you first, and Ro, you can add on.
Great. Yeah, so, I think that the most key principle here is really targeting funding towards proven strategies. What do we see working to accelerate learning for students in classrooms? And, the thing we all know, which is that teachers are the single most important in school factor affecting education and the outcomes of students. So, we are really looking at how do we invest our funding in ways that also recognize that we're not going to get really great teachers in front of kids unless we in ways that are sustainable within this, the budget constraints that we have, unless we think really differently about staffing models in our classrooms and think about compensation models. And I think one of the things that we have going for us is that constraint and urgent needs for change often allow for change to happen and allow for innovation to happen. Because we know like this type of change of staffing models and compensation models is really hard for districts, really hard for schools to make these changes, but we're in an environment where we have to because of the urgent need and because of the budget constraints. So I think, really focusing on, we are not going to get there with the like one teacher, 30 kids, everything just continues to get piled on top of the teacher role. And we have this teacher turnover, and regardless of how teachers are entering, prepared or not prepared, they all enter the exact same role. Like that isn't the model that's going to get us really different results for kids. So what we've been really focused on in Texas is creating sustainable funding strategies for things like strategic compensation, strategic staffing models, building grow your own pipelines, thinking differently about the role of teachers so that you can have a teacher apprentice or a teacher resident teaching alongside a master teacher. You can like spread the impact of your best teachers, and you can have compensation models that differentiate your best teachers, pay them more, give them some release time to help coach and develop other teachers, spread their impact, and retain them in classrooms. So these are the types of models we need to be looking at, and we need to figure out how we both have state level sustainable funding sources and help districts really put these models together.
Well, I'd like to start with first, we got to change the legislation laws around what is a priority. And we need to put our money where our mouth is and start funding education appropriately. But first, equity is the most important thing to make sure all kids are getting a quality education in the classroom. So we got to make sure that those resources are available to support those education for all students, not just those minority students. Every kid needs a quality education in the classroom. Also, I said transparency and budget. You need qualified people to handle. See, education is it's a business, but our business is educating kids. So we got to be focused on it's just not education. We got resources that guide the principal. We got to get the right people that handles the money in place so we can align these resources to be more impactful for kids, because those ideas just ain't going to come on its own when you got unqualified people that's handling the resources. And make sure your decisions based on data. A lot of decisions, I can see boards are making decisions and they're not based on any foundation or data. You need data, and they need to know holistically the budget. So we got to have transparency in budget. Now ain't the time of just having a budget heading. It got to be the forefront of running this organization, because this is an organization and it's a business, as I said. And long-term sustainability. What can we do different? It's, transporting kids, housing, all those things got to change the way we got to move, because we're the school district and education is changing. So we have to be prepared for those changes, and you got to have people that's ready to pivot. And those pivot is based on a long-term strategic plan that is directly centered around kids. We say kids are our priority. We need to put our money where our mouth is and make kids be our priority. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Kelvin and Ro, for both of your insights on that. This next question I'm going to direct to Lynn and Quabila. As district and state leaders make tough decisions about how to invest limited dollars, what's one piece of advice that you'd offer to help them stay focused on what matters most for students and those educators who serve them? And Lynn, we'll start off with you, and Quabila, feel free to chime in after.
Awesome. Let me see if I can give just one. I may give multiple pieces of advice around this. I think the first thing I would do is, in a moment of chaos or crisis, I would just breathe, right? And I would just really ground ourselves on like similar to what Rose shared, like what is evidence-based, what is data-driven, and what is truly moving the needle for our kids in terms of outcomes. So I would just start there. I think the second thing I would offer as well is that like I would look at this moment, this new normal, as an opportunity. Our opportunity to kind of reimagine the role of teachers and learning within our classrooms. And I think you're seeing this get elevated in terms of how we compensate our teachers, how we support them, the pipeline by which they enter in, how we think about the school culture and the workload by thinking about AI and thinking about the development that our administrators and school leaders need as well. And as we think about like the professional growth that is actually needed in terms of developing that as well. You know, our teachers are largely facilitators of learners, and they're doing this in collaboration with our students, our family, and others at the table. The second thing I would say is that I think we need the third thing, maybe the last piece of advice I would give is that we need to shift away from like finding the dollars to thinking about like investing in resources smartly, right? Because I think that will actually elevate a level of redesign that is actually needed. So, and by that, I mean, how do we think about our academic programs differently? How do we think about our staffing model differently? How do we think about the use of time that we have in our classroom or even the teachers? We recently, as of today, we actually are releasing a report at TNTP around teachers' time use as well, as a way to kind of elevate how, you know, how teachers use their time, um, and the role that technology is emerging, the difference between how teachers use their time. And I would say when you think about time, when you think about technology, when you think about staffing, when you think about even money, like those are huge resources just beyond funding as well. And then the final point, and I think this gets to the state, is that I think there is work to be done. I would continue to elevate your concerns around what needs to be true, whether it's a student center funding model, whether it's raising the starting salary for new teachers, whether it's thinking about flexibility for each of those things. I think there's opportunities to do that. At the state level in terms of shaping those policies.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think my piece of advice would be to engage your community early and often. I mean, we're not in the first year that districts are facing budget constraints, right? Really, that last year of ESSER funds is when we started seeing more headlines about budget constraints, and since then, things have been exacerbated. And so, really be clear about the fiscal realities ahead and give communities a window into the different decisions that have to be made. When we were working on a couple of resources regarding the expiration of ESSER funds, I took a look into how our districts communicating what's happening, right? School finance is a very niche subject, and even as someone who like it's my job to understand all of this, I still have questions, right, about how things work and how the dollars flow. um but I was able to like find a bright spot, and Everett Public Schools in Washington State, on their district website, they had different slide decks that were digestible and written in plain language. They had a lot of visuals that outlined what the causes of the district's financial troubles were, right? Declining enrollment, expiration of ESSER funding. They didn't get as significant of an increase in state funding as they thought that they would get. And so they just presented that information pretty plainly. In addition, the district also listed out what are our equity principles as it pertains to how we're going to make budgeting decisions. And that first principle was students first, right? And there were some other ones that I don't recall, but I think that can be really powerful in terms of, as a district leader, you are communicating, we understand that we're in tough times, but here's how we're going to make our decisions. Here are the guiding principles we have. And then also the district distributed, I believe, 2 or 3 different surveys to the community, asking the community, what are some ways you think we can close these budget gaps, right? What might the community be willing to sacrifice, right, as a result of now being more informed? And I know, we often talk about like community engagement, and sometimes it's just like, public testimony where you get 2 or 3 minutes, if that, to say what's on your mind. But I really think that Everett Public Schools display during this time what it meaningfully looks like to engage a community early and often around these budget decisions. And also just understand, like, even if you do that, there are still going to be people that may criticize what's happening. But at the end of the day, when you hide information, when you're not transparent, you don't give your community an opportunity to understand and also like problem solve with you.
Thank you. Thank you both, Wabila and Lynn, for your expertise there. These next set of questions are just going to dive a bit deeper into each of you all's vantage point and work a bit further. So this first question is for you, Kelvie. The Texas Teacher Incentive Allotment, or TIA, has become a national model for linking compensation to teacher effectiveness and student outcomes. As the program continues to grow, what would you say are the key lessons about design, implementation, or sustainability that might be most valuable for other states to consider if they're interested in making similar investments?
So we've learned a lot through implementing and scaling the teacher incentive allotment. And we've really been trying to learn from that as we've been working towards other initiatives in the state. Given this is a kind of finance-oriented conversation, and I know finance can be a little wonky, but I wanted to get into the weeds a little bit. One of the key pieces of the teacher incentive allotment that I think is critical is that it's set up as an entitlement in our foundation school program. So it's an allotment that districts are entitled to if they have approved systems and are designating teachers, and that funding is going to flow and is in budgets regardless of what happens. And this was critical because in the past, we've seen lots of teacher incentive grants and discretionary programs come and go. And they come and people reward teachers, and then budgets get hard and they get cut and they go away. And so teachers and districts were obviously wary of this program, being like, well, great, we have it this year, but are we gonna have it next year? And this is a lot of work. Why would we do it? And so the fact that it was actually embedded in our foundation school program as an entitlement was really key in setting this up. And I think we got there. So teacher incentive allotment passed in 2019 as part of a larger overhaul of the school finance system in Texas in a bill, HB 3. And what led up to that was a commission. So there was a school finance commission where legislators heard a lot of testimony from districts, from teachers, from people with experience in the field discussing why compensation was important, why we needed to think about compensation differently, and showed models of how it worked. So in Dallas ISD, they had a model of a strategic compensation system with results, with teacher voices that could speak to the impact of this model on retaining teachers and outcomes for kids. And so I think learning from that, we've really set a similar pace for some of our teacher pipeline and recruitment initiatives that we've been working on, and had the teacher vacancy task force really set up some proof points of residency models across the state, helping districts set up residency models so that when we were trying to talk to the legislature about funding incentives for teachers, and why we needed to invest in high quality preparation and how to set up high quality preparation in a way that would lead to teacher retention, lead to student outcomes, we could point to the teacher voices calling for this. We could show the proof points. We could have the district leaders up there talking to legislators. And again, we could advocate for, not that we advocate, other people advocate for making sure that this was set up actually as a sustainable funding model for districts moving forward. So we, as part of the 89th legislative session, just passed a prep allotment that again is part of the Foundation School Program. It's a sustainable funding model that's an entitlement for districts who meet the bar of high quality preparation partnerships. And these then districts will get this funding to fund teacher preparation for the first time in the state. So I think this type of really learning from how do you hear from people, show what works, build that investment, and like advocate for really sustainable funding over time is really important to the success of these initiatives.
Thank you, Kelby. And very quickly, I know you just gave a really detailed look. I'd love for you to talk about some of the results from everything that you learned, because you all have had some pretty notable results around retention. So if you could quickly speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah. The teacher incentive allotment, like I said, it was established in 2019. Our first cohort of districts was 33 districts across the state. We are now estimating approximately 800 districts in Texas will be participating in the teacher incentive allotment by this fall. So that is huge in terms of scale across the state, especially for a program that a lot of people were like, I don't think districts are going to do this. They are, and it's spreading. We've also seen incredible retention results. So our designated TIA designated teachers are retained 9.4 percentage points higher than non-TIA designated teachers. And we've actually seen that as we've scaled, those retention improvements have gotten bigger, not smaller. So I think that is also really a testament to the hard work and implementation of the teams across Texas to do this with fidelity and do it in a way that's getting better as it scales. And then finally, I think the real proof and the real importance here is that we see that TIA districts, so not just the teachers that get designated as part of the program, but the entire districts that engage in TIA have significantly improved their student outcomes, both their proficiency levels, but then also their student growth levels. And we believe this is happening actually because TIA districts have to engage in this process of really defining what does strong instruction look like, calibrate that with instructional leaders, measure ways to get to student growth, and then have a culture of teachers understanding that this is what it takes to get designated and working towards that. And so it actually improves the student achievement of the entire district, not just the teachers that get designated.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Very phenomenal results with that program. And again, we're about halfway through the panel. So if you have questions that you'd like our panelists to answer, feel free to drop those in our Q&A chat and we'll make sure we elevate those. This next question is for you, Lynn. Your recent publications emphasize the need for financial agility. And that means not just balancing the budget, but aligning spending to what students need most. From your perspective, what does it take to build a system that can respond to enrollment declines or funding cliffs without compromising on, first, strong staffing plans, instructional quality, or as we think over the long term, that sustainability?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think there are some early signs that the next budget season will be even more challenging than the current budget season in the school year that is coming up. And I really tried to put myself in the shoes of a CFO. I was CFO for Shelby County Schools in Memphis. I worked at the Tennessee Department of Education within their finance team, and even was a leader for in the charter space as well. And I think for me, there was two balances. Was one, how to address the immediate need and creating the resource flexibility that you need. And then how do you begin to plan for the long-term sustainability of the work and to ensure that the momentum of the work will continue to happen? Part of the article, there was kind of 4 points that were kind of shared. And part of the article was to elevate that. One, it really starts with examining and interrogating everything, your academic programs, your student support services, your district's operations, and then really taking a ROI or return on investment kind of lens that is data driven around that. What are the clear goals, strategies, and costs, and how do we think about that? I even think there are moments where we can even elevate like outcome-based contracting to actually be a mechanism to kind of enforce that accountability as you think about it. I think the second thing is kind of introducing some new ways to actually deliver on the promise that we have for all kids, and that's high quality learning. And there are moments to actually think about how we can be more efficient with with the public dollars that we have in terms of education. And I think there's many ways to think through the instructional model, think about the flexible staffing, think about AI. But I also think there are ways to kind of reassess like simple operational things like your master schedule, your transportation, as well, to free up those dollars to allow for investment. And I think what we saw in COVID is that we saw innovation that happened, and there was a shift in that mindset. And I think we're seeing that continue, right? So I think part of like it's not just streamlining, but it's also like prioritizing innovation to get the coherence, the learning, and the sustainability. I've been a CFO for a school district. We typically do an annual budget. I will say an annual budget is going to be inadequate, right? It's inadequate when you have uncertainty, you have volatility. So I think what CFOs are going to be required to do is begin to think about the risks, the opportunity, develop scenarios along with that budget, and provide a set of strategic actions and trade-offs as well, right? And that may be there may be many opportunities, right? There may be opportunities to think about how to expand some high demand programs to even thinking about looking at your district footprint. But I think no longer just providing one view of a budget will be sufficient. And then the last thing I will say is, and this is somewhat different, but I think this is a great opportunity to actually align your strategic plan with a long-term financial plan. So how do you marry that together where it's not just thinking 3 to 5 years out, what resources do we need to invest in order to ensure that we're able to deliver on the priorities and the outcomes? I often say that your budget should not be just a collection of funds. It's actually a collection of priorities and decisions that are being made. They're reflective of your values. So you want to make sure that your strategic plan and your long-term financial view of things is actually aligned. And I think it's going to be really critical, particularly in this moment, for districts and state agencies to do that.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful answer, Lynn. And I believe it's a wonderful bridge, especially advice you were giving to the district leader perspective with CFOs. And so, Ro, I'm going to turn this directly to you as you sit in that seat. We know that districts are under immense pressure to manage immediate staffing needs while also remaining focused on those long-term goals like teacher quality and student achievement. How would you say you're navigating those trade-offs to ensure that today's decisions don't necessarily undercut tomorrow's success?
Well, I think that we have gone away from what the core is of our instructional needs. Um, we got to engage. Going to school used to be fun for kids and used to be fun for teachers too, to educate kids, right? We keep on pivoting all the time. This come new, we change the way we engage students in the classroom. That engagement can be fun for teacher if we do it in a way that is building a community. And the community wants to be involved in the education too. So when you get that support from the community, we have to look at that. The only thing is to focus on our core. If it's working, right, you should be building upon it, not just pivoting for the next new thing. There's going to be a lot of competing interests out there. It's so much things going on, but do what works for your environment and for your kids, right? And there's a way to, partnership with other districts that already having those success. We don't do that too often, sharing that partnership. What makes this successful? Every time this might work, then we pivot to something new. Then we pivot. That's work on teachers. Their thing is they want to be engaged with their students. They want to know the new technology. So we got to invest in professional development for them so they can be enhanced with the AI coming out, the technology, because a lot of things are scary for them too. So we got to make it fun. So remember, fundamental is fun. When you are engaging kids, they're crafting in students' minds in the classroom, right? And what happened to that? There's dangers. Now we worry about safety. We worry about all those things that we shouldn't be. But we got to make a culture. We got to have nice facilities. We got to have an environment and a culture that is engaging for teachers to want to become teachers, and we got to pay them well. They're the ones molding our kids, and we don't even pay them well. And then we get all these mandates from the state. They're not in line with what is going on at the district, what is going on in the classroom. And you got to understand, we got to have superintendents that know that budget piece is maintained. Everybody was talking about the ESSER club. If you had good people in there that understand that there was going to be a club, if you don't manage those resources properly, you would never hit a club. So I don't know why that was a thing, but it was a thing, right? School districts going off the cliff. That means they had no strategic long-term plan. We're just focused. You can't just focus on one side. You got to be able to pivot because you got an operational side and an academic side. And you want to make sure the teachers have what they need because they're the one engaged in the classroom with our students. We focus on all this operational stuff, all this thing, transporting, custodian. We need that. But it's in moderation. There's unique ways to make all those things happen about partnership with the community, engaged in housing for teachers, right? Low income housing. We got to make students a priority. And that's by equity, because we got low income kids that can't get to the same equity. Equity does not mean equal. It means that you got to put more resources where they need it so they can come up. Then we said we had a gap. The gap is even getting wider now. We haven't addressed the real issues. We have turned and we just chasing. It seems like we're just running and really haven't aligned those resources to really be impactful to address the real issues of what's going on. And we need those thoughtful people at the center of attention and running these districts to make sure these kids get a quality education. We got to pivot. We got to pivot quickly because our livelihood is at stake because the kids is our future. And if the way we going, I don't know what that's going to look like if we don't do something that is focus on our core of instruction and make it fun for kids again and for our teachers that come to school just for kids to learn. But that's it. That's all I have to say.
That's all you have to say. That's a mic drop, bro. Thank you for just that passion and just re-emphasizing that importance of consistency and coherence on behalf of young people. And I'm sure you see all the lovely affirmations that are coming for your work and the passion that you share. We're going to wrap up the moderated portion of this conversation with you, Quabila, before we pivot to some Q&A. Your recent brief highlights the gap between what districts need to support student success and what they actually receive. From your perspective, what strategies have been most effective in helping state and district leaders identify but also advocate for funding that reflects the real cost of educating all students to high standards?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to keep this brief because there's a lot right here. But I think the primary thing, right, that needs to be done is one, states need to actually understand what it costs to provide a high quality education to every student, whether they are in a major urban district or in a rural or sparse district. And while some states have made progress in doing such, many have not. Believe it or not, there are states that have had formulas in place since I was born or even before I was born. And I was born in the 90s, for those who are listening. And so that is highly problematic. The students that schools and districts are serving today are not the same students that, schools and districts were serving 30 years ago. And so one primary tool that we have seen, and to levels of varying effectiveness depending on design and implementation, are studies of what it actually costs, right? In the field, they're formally called adequacy studies, but that doesn't really mean much. But essentially, those studies look at what does it actually cost for all students to attain either like an average, on some sort of standardized test, right? And so like doing that well and thoroughly needs to occur. Regularly assessing what is and isn't working has to occur at the state level, right? This isn't just all on districts. The state, considering that the state essentially functions as the bank, right? Most districts are getting their funding from the state, especially if they have lower wealth. So the state really is responsible for calculating those costs. And those studies enable policy leaders to understand what our students needs as well as the educator workforce, because we know those needs are changing every day. And when it comes to doing these assessments, they can be wholesale, they can be the whole kit and caboodle about looking at the entire formula or finance system, or they can look at very specific aspects of how the state is funding schools, right? So looking at teacher compensation or looking at literacy, right? Which is why we see states propose different programs or double down on certain investments, because they've decided, hey, we're not seeing the results we need. And so we need to invest a little bit more. And just lastly, to sort of round out on that assessment piece, it is essential that there's some sort of like regular assessing, right? Not just like once in a lifetime, we're going to look at everything and then put it on the shelf. There are several states that have created policies to enable this, right? So in New Jersey, the legislature evaluates its state finance system every 3 years. In Illinois, after adopting an entirely new formula in 2017, they decided it's essential for us to evaluate this big investment every 5 years. And they have to, make adjustments as they learn, like, is this supporting our students or not? Are we getting the academic outcomes that we want to see? And then in DC, which, is a district, but a state. I live in DC. It evaluates its funding formulas every 2 years. And so there are models and practices that I think if you're listening and you work on state level advocacy, pressuring your policymakers to do this sort of thorough investigation of what it actually costs, because there is a mismatch. And it's not just inflation. It's the fact that we are like schools are fundamentally doing different things. They're feeding kids. In some instances, they're helping them with laundry. They're transporting them. I mean, there's so many things that we've tasked the education system with. The funding systems need to match that.
Thank you, Wabila, and thank you everyone for just a very enriching first part of our discussion of the panel. I know that our time is running low somehow. Time flies when you're having fun. So we're gonna pivot to some Q&A. We did get some questions from our audience. Kelby, this first question is for you, and it's gonna be a mouthful. So feel free to take some notes to see which parts you'll be able to elevate from here. But could you speak to programs in Texas that target administrator quality? It seems that the state could avoid high turnover by better preparing principals, superintendents, and other administrators to respond to the needs in the classroom. Also, while you're addressing this question, can you speak to what TEA attributes to higher retention rates of the TIA designated teachers? Are there any supportive measures or resources those teachers cite as their reason for staying? Again, I know that was a lot, but feel free to tackle that.
I'll try to tackle both quickly. So on the administrator front, we agree. We think well-prepared school leaders have such an incredible impact on the school-wide culture. And that was one of the recommendations out of the teacher vacancy task force as well, was the importance of training and supporting school leaders to set up the strong culture and support of their teachers in order to retain and develop teachers at their schools. So there are supports that we provide as a state related to primarily instructional supports as in our Texas instructional leadership work around the effective schools framework and training and developing not just principals, but principal leaders, principal managers, because we know principals, like everybody else, need coaching and development. And so you actually need those principal managers trained to be able to coach and develop those school leaders to then be able to coach and develop their teachers. So really creating those models of development and really focusing our school leaders on strong school-wide culture routines, as well as strong instruction in classrooms. One of the additions in the most recent legislative session was an expansion of the teacher incentive allotment to something called the enhanced teacher incentive allotment. And actually you get additional funding now as a district for doing some additions to the teacher incentive allotment, including changing the way that you do your step and ladder compensation systems, and actually having a principal incentive allotment alongside your teacher incentive allotment. So that's another incentive for districts to really be investing in the compensation and retention of their best principals and school leaders as well. On the why, we see stronger retention of TIA designated teachers. I think, part of it is compensation. Like, we see really flat teacher compensation. So in Texas, especially, we actually our starting pay for teachers is really competitive, especially when you think about a 20-something coming right out of college, making an average of $60,000 a year. It's a pretty competitive wage. But then you see it takes you 20 years and you get to 70,000 in most of our district compensation systems. And that is not what someone 20 years later needs to raise a family, to pay for their own kids' college educations. So until we really change the way we structure our compensation for teachers, so with the teacher incentive allotment, you can actually get up to $100,000 within your first 5 years of teaching if you get designated. And so even just having that pathway, I think provides that incentive for teachers to say, I want to stay, I can stay, I can be a teacher and make a living wage. And I know what it looks like, what I need to do in order to get that designation and earn this six-figure salary.
Thank you so much, Kelby. As you all saw in the chat, we had some really good questions come in for you all as well, but we are short on time, so we're going to go ahead and end the Q&A portion here, but we'll be sure to follow up with all of our attendees with resources and further resources to support their questions. Just thank you. I'm extending my gratitude, heart symbol, to all of you for coming and sharing your expertise. We really value it. We're going to pivot towards sharing some resources. So please say goodbye to our panelists for now, and we'll wrap up with some important next steps.
Thank you so much. I just have to say again to our panelists, who were absolutely fantastic. Again, such a rich conversation. I will be brief to make sure that we are respectful of time. Our panelists mentioned a number of fantastic resources, and so we've listed them here. One is the website to the TIA effort that the Texas Education Agency has implemented. We're excited about that as a model that folks on this call can learn from. The next is a really fantastic and rich and actionable series of papers from the Education Trust that our panelist Quabila had talked about on fair school funding formulas. And then the last is the teacher time use report that Lynn had mentioned in his remarks about which provides a really helpful resource for how districts can really get into thinking about how they recruit and retain their best teachers given the use of teachers' time. So we will follow up with these both with the panel and also these specific resources in our post webinar email. Also, we wanted to share some really actionable just-in-time supports that TNTP is able to offer district and state leaders. We are able to do deep dive into policy analysis and educator pipeline data, create communities of practice at all levels of a system to really connect and share learning, both within a district and across districts. And then we offer a number of supports around workforce support and retention, which we are, as we have our shared goals around increasing student outcomes and transforming educational experiences for young people. These are some just-in-time supports that we are excited to offer anyone who would be interested in partnering with us. We also have a number of, talking about just-in-time supports, a number of financial services that TNTP offers as well that really do meet this moment. There's a lot of text on here. I will ensure that I am quick in nature. But as you can see here, we have a scenario-based budgeting service. It's a toolkit that helps leaders model best case, likely worst case funding scenarios that can enable proactive contingency planning. An ROI analysis that allows, it's a decision-making tool, long-term financial projections, and resource reinvention, a tool to support districts beyond budgeting. So a number of tools. Again, we'll make sure that you get this this deck so that you can take a look at this, but these tools and supports and services are really there to help school district and state leaders think about how they can proactively plan during a time of constrained financial budgets. And lastly, we wanted to name that, we talked a bit about funding constraints overall. Next week on August 7th, we have a webinar that is going to dive deep into the federal funding landscape. And so that registration is open and would love for you to join us. And thank you to my colleague, Demetria, who put that registration in the chat, and we'll be sure to follow up with that link as well. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are thrilled to have had you here. A huge thanks to our incredible panelists. And we hope to see you next week at our webinar on federal funding. Thank you all. Have a great one.